I hate crime. Her name was Doreen Walker. She told me that right away. The rest I saw for myself. Brown hair, blue eyes, trim figure. I pointed to a chair. She took it, crossed her landing gear. Then we got down to business.
I'd like to hire your services, Mr. Kent.
Uh-huh. Doing what?
Proving that a man is innocent of murder.
Has anybody said he's guilty?
A jury.
When?
The day before yesterday.
Uh-huh. That'd be James Clark.
Yes.
He killed his wife.
He didn't.
How do you know he didn't?
I just know he wouldn't.
Uh-huh. They say he didn't get along with his wife. That he didn't live with her.
She wasn't right for him. Too cruel, too selfish.
You seem to know a lot about Clark.
I'm in love with him.
Oh. And how does he feel about you?
Why should that matter?
Well, if he loved you and his wife wouldn't let him go, he'd have had a good reason for getting rid of her.
I tell you, James wasn't like that.
James, huh?
All right, if you must know. We planned to marry, but she wouldn't give him a divorce.
That didn't come out in the trial.
No, James was protecting me.
Where exactly do you come into this?
I've been James' secretary for almost 6 years.
I see.
I just know he didn't kill her, Mr. Kent.
Can you tell me something that'll help me believe he didn't?
Only that he's kind, gentle.
Something concrete, solid, something I can hold on to.
No.
Just your belief in him, huh?
Yes.
Did you ever stop to figure that maybe he did kill her?
No.
He wanted a divorce. She wouldn't give it to him. He lost his head, choked her.
No.
They had a strong case against him, 2 witnesses.
They lied. I'm willing to pay you to prove that they lied.
She opened a purse, pushed a check onto my desk. 162 pounds.
I'll sign it now if you accept.
How much have you got in the bank?
The check is good.
How much have you got?
162 pounds.
Here. I'll send you a bill later.
Then you accept?
Yep. I'm a sucker for loyalty. Two witnesses had sent James Clark on his way to the gallows. I went to see number 1, Felix Warner, janitor of the building where the Clarks had lived.
Private detective, huh?
Yeah.
What do you want with me?
I'm checking back on the murder of Mrs. Clark.
Oh.
According to your evidence, James Clark walked into the building at 7:30 on the night of the murder.
That's just what happened.
And he left about 8.
Yeah,
You saw him coming and going.
that's right.
Uh-huh. The next morning, Mrs. Clark's body was found by the woman who does her cleaning. She'd been strangled.
That's what the coroner said.
He also said that she'd been dead for at least 12 hours.
Yeah.
But Clark was staying at a hotel. He claims he didn't come near this building.
You didn't expect him to admit he murdered her, did you?
No. You gave some other evidence, too.
I answered the questions they asked me.
You claimed the Clarks were always arguing.
Yeah.
You must do a lot of poking around.
Well, the way they argued, you couldn't help hearing. Want to know any more?
Yeah. What were you doing around the building at 7:30 that night?
I had some work to do. And I've got some work to do now.
Who paid you to give that evidence?
Nobody.
Do you know what the rap is for criminal perjury?
Nobody paid me. He killed her and he'll swing for it. Now get out of my way.
Something in his eyes. A flicker. Something that shouldn't have been there. Not enough to take into a courtroom, but enough to make me very interested in witness number 2. A coffee shop. Witness number 2 was a waitress there. I sat down at one of her tables.
Yes? Coffee?
Nope.
Then what'll it be?
A talk. Laura.
How do you know my name?
I'm a private investigator. Larry Kent.
What do you want?
I'm asking questions about the Clark murder.
Questions?
Yeah.
I told all I knew during the trial.
Clark said he had coffee here at 7:45 the night of the murder.
Well, he didn't.
He said you served him, had a talk with him.
I didn't.
He said you took his money for the coffee.
Well, he was lying.
Somebody's lying. But maybe it wasn't Clark.
Do you want your coffee or don't you?
A flicker of the eyes again. This time a flush of the cheeks to go with it. I didn't have coffee, I left. At 5:30 I did some tail work. At 6, I was standing outside an apartment door.
You.
Can I come in?
I'm not in the mood for answering questions.
Relax. This happens to be a social call.
It better be. All right, come in.
Thanks.
Now, what are you doing here?
I'd like to get better acquainted.
Is that so?
Yeah.
Why were you asking those questions?
That was on behalf of a client.
Who was the client?
A dame who's in love with Clark.
What she want you to do?
Find out if Clark was getting a raw deal.
Well, he isn't. I was on duty all that night, and he never came in.
I don't doubt you, Laura. Matter of fact, I turned in my complete report this afternoon.
Oh. What'd you say?
That the evidence against Clark was solid. So are you.
Did you come here just to tell me that?
I'm only getting started. I was wondering if maybe you'd like to go night clubbing or something.
Are you sure that's why you came?
The answer is in the way I'm looking at you.
Maybe I've got a date.
Maybe you can break it.
Maybe I don't like the idea of going out with you. Maybe I don't believe you.
Look, I'm a private eye. I was paid to ask questions. Okay, I did, but now that's all over.
How do you know where to find me?
I followed you. It's an old American custom.
I don't like being followed.
Well, how else was I going to find you?
You could have asked for my address in the coffee shop.
You were sore at me.
Maybe I still am.
Maybe if I'm nice, I can break that down, huh?
Keep your distance.
Sorry, it's that willpower of mine. But how about that nightclub?
Now, why should you want to take me out?
You want me to tell you?
It might help.
Okay. You've got blue eyes that can be warm.
Yes?
You've got a figure that makes me start figuring.
Yes?
You've got a perfume that makes me want to close my eyes and grab and...
Oh.
Want me to give you any more reasons?
You did all right.
Now, that nightclub?
I have to bathe first.
Okay.
I'll just put on the shower.
Right.
Make yourself comfortable.
Mm-hmm. But just before you go...
Oh.
I was putting on an act for all I was worth. For a minute, that made me feel like half a heel. Till I remembered that Laura might have helped frame a guy on a murder rap. So, I put even more gusto into my performance.
Oh. Oh.
Finally, she pushed herself away, smiled, gently shoved me into the living room.
If we were to go, I'd better get started.
Yeah,
Help yourself to a drink.
okay.
And make one for me. I'll be out in a few minutes.
I headed for the liquid refreshments, mixed 2 drinks, took one, sat down. Then I got up. The shot had come from the bathroom. I ran in there. Laura had turned on the shower before the bullet had done nasty things to her face. The flat was on the ground floor. There was a window in the bathroom, too small to climb through, but plenty big enough to fire a gun through. I ran around to the back of the building, but whoever had fired the shot had plenty of time to get away. The cops came. Later, I had a talk with Sergeant Brophy, who was in charge of investigations. He didn't like private detectives. I told him my story.
And, I suppose you've got a theory, too.
Yeah. Whoever killed her is also responsible for the murder of Mrs. Clark.
No, Kent. We already solved Mrs. Clark's murder.
Maybe you didn't. Maybe Laura gave false evidence at the trial. Maybe the real killer saw her with me and got scared she'd talk.
So he just popped her off, eh?
Yeah.
And who was it?
Center your investigation around Mrs. Clark and you might find out.
Our investigation of Mrs. Clark's death is over. The murder was solved. We're on a new case now.
But the case may be tied up.
Mrs. Clark was strangled. Laura Marshall was shot with a .38. So we start from scratch.
How can you get so pig-headed?
What was that?
Pig-headed, lame-brained, dumb.
Now look, Kent, you might be able to get away with that stuff in New York or Chicago, but this is Sydney. Now mind your P's and Q's or you don't get your license renewed. Get out of here.
With pleasure.
And don't leave town, we might want you.
So I was on my own. I went to see Doreen Walker.
One of the witnesses killed?
Yeah,
Then that proves James is innocent.
not as far as the cops are concerned.
Oh, but surely they must see some significance in the fact that
Well,
one
they
of them...
don't. To them, this is a brand new case.
What can we do, Mr. Kent?
Let's see where we are. Okay, we assume that Laura Marshall committed perjury.
Of course she did. I've said that all along.
Yeah, sure, but where does that leave us?
Well, there's the other witness.
The janitor.
Mm-hmm.
What about him?
Well, if the girl was lying, so was he.
Yeah, but who was paying them to lie? Who would have benefited financially from Mrs. Clark's death?
Why no one.
You're sure?
Positive. She had no money of her own. For that matter, James hasn't very much money either.
That brings us to another motive. A guy. James Clark and his wife didn't get along, but, I don't suppose she twiddled her thumbs, did she?
She had her good times.
With who?
Well, there was Charles Dean.
How did he feel about her?
He was in love with her for years.
Did she reciprocate?
Well, I know she saw him very often. He used to call it her flat.
And she knew that her husband was in love with you.
Yes.
Yet she wouldn't give him a divorce.
In some ways, she was a sadist.
Dean plays around with her for years, but she won't give her husband a divorce. Maybe Dean didn't like it. Can you get me his address?
I think it'll be in the telephone directory.
It was. Potts Point. I copied it down, put it in my pocket. Then I went to see the janitor, Felix Warner.
I've got nothing to say to you.
I've got plenty to say. Your fellow witness, Laura, she's dead.
What?
Killed a couple of hours ago.
I don't believe it.
Here, read it in the paper. He did. Then he threw the paper down.
This has got nothing to do with me.
She was a witness with you. She was killed so she'd keep her mouth shut about Clark.
But Clark did go to his wife's flat that night.
At 7:45, he was in that coffee shop.
No, he wasn't.
How much did you get paid?
Nothing. I told the truth.
The way things stand, Felix, you're an accessory to murder. If Clark is hanged, it'll be even worse. Who paid you to give that evidence?
Nobody.
Was it Charles Dean? A shot in the dark, but it stopped him dead for a second. There was a funny look on his face, one I couldn't figure. Then he was shaking his head again.
No.
It was Dean.
I never heard of anybody by that name.
You must have. You do a lot of sneaking around. And Dean used to come here to see Mrs. Clark.
I tell you, Clark killed his wife.
You're in a spot, Felix. Cops on one side, Dean on the other.
He went up. I don't know what you're talking about.
Laura gave false evidence. Then she was killed so she'd never spill the beans. Suppose Dean gets to thinking you might talk.
No,
huh?
I told the truth at the trial. It was Clark.
He was breaking, standing in a corner, ready to fall apart. I kept at him. Then he fooled me, reached into his pocket.
I'll shoot you. Shoot if you come any closer.
Don't be a dope. Put away the gun.
Stay where you are. Right where you are.
Use your head, Felix. I'm giving you a chance, but Dean won't.
I'm making my own mind about that. Now go on. Get out of here.
He was just excited enough to start pulling the trigger. I left, figuring I could come back later. This time I went out to Potts Point, to Dean's bachelor apartment. He was drunk.
What did you want?
A talk.
Talk? What do you want to talk about?
I was just out to see Felix Warner.
Huh? Who's Warner?
Mrs. Clark's janitor.
What do you know about her? What do you know about her?
You were in love with her,
Sure I was.
but she kept you on a string, so you choked her.
Why, you
He
dirty...
came at me, fingers going for my throat. I let him have it right on the button. Out cold. I frisked him. Then I went through the small apartment. What was I looking for? A gun. A gun that might have been used on Laura. But I found nothing. Dean was still out when I finished. I got ready to revive him. I listened to the phone ring. Then I got to wondering who might be calling Dean, so... Hello? Payphone.
Hello, Dean. Dean, I've got to talk to you. Dean, hello. Hello, Dean.
This is Kent. Don't hang up.
Where's Dean?
On the floor, out. This is the right time to talk, Felix, before it's too late.
What are you doing there?
Trying to get Dean to talk. And if he does, you're in a really tough spot. 5 years, maybe 10, so make up your mind quick.
What do I do to him?
You get a break. Crown witness. Now play it smart.
All right. On the way over.
I'll wait for you then. Dean gave a drunken moan. I started for the door, then I stopped in my tracks. Something hit me. A possibility, a hunch. Something that made me look out the window. Nobody in the street. My car was parked 2 blocks away, a habit of mine when I'm on a case. I waited 5 minutes and almost gave it up when I saw somebody outside. I waited. 1, 2, 3 minutes. I hadn't expected the caller to press the buzzer. I thought it might be a key, a private key. I went to the door.
Mr. Kent,
Hi, Doreen.
where's Mr. Dean?
Indisposed.
What happened?
I'm more interested in what's going to happen. Come in. She looked at Dean on the floor. Dean, who didn't know whether to go back to sleep or wake up. I asked her why she'd come.
I wanted to talk to him.
Why?
Well, after you spoke about him, I realized that he could be the one who killed Mrs. Clark.
Why would he kill her?
Well, he'd been seeing her for years, yet she wouldn't give James a divorce.
Uh-huh.
He visited Mrs. Clark at her flat quite often. He would have known Warner, the janitor.
So?
Well, in a fit of anger, he may have lost his head, choked Mrs. Clark.
The theory that love and hate go close together, huh?
Yes, that's right.
Mm-hmm. Keep going.
After he killed her, sanity came back, and self-protection was his first thought. Then a plan. Why not make it look as though James killed her?
Then?
He offered the janitor money to claim that he saw James enter the building at 7:30.
But suppose James Clark had a solid alibi. Suppose he'd been visiting friends or something, or had been with you.
Well, in some way, Dean may have found out where he'd been.
And the waitress, Laura?
Well, if Dean knew that James had gone to that coffee shop, he could have paid the waitress just as he paid the janitor.
Uh-huh. But now the really interesting question. Why did you come here?
To make Dean tell the truth.
Just like that.
No, just like this.
There was a gun in her hand. It was pointed at my left side. I waited, wondering what came next. It was up to her.
I didn't even stop to think.
Do you have to point that rod at me?
Sorry.
She lowered the gun. I took a deep breath. Dean, as drunk as you can get, had given up the idea of coming around, or he was foxing. There was a flower vase near the window. I pulled out the flowers, got ready to throw the water in his face. Then I stopped short, put the vase down.
What is it, Mr. Kent?
I think I just saw another visitor. Get in the bedroom.
Who did you see?
I didn't say, just pushed her and followed. We waited 2 minutes. Somebody trying the door, finding it open. Walking in quietly. Bending over Dean. Bringing out a gun, moving it carefully towards his head. Then there was me coming out of the bedroom. Just point the gun at the floor, Felix.
I was making sure
That you'd get away with murder?
No. He killed Mrs. Clark. Laura, too.
You mean you were going to make it look that way? Kill him, put the gun in his hand, then sign a confession saying that he scared you into perjury.
He did. He threatened me.
You were the one making threats. You paid Laura to testify that Clark wasn't at the coffee shop. Then you killed her when I got on her tail.
You can never prove anything like that.
When the ballistic boys at police headquarters have a look at that gun in your hand, they'll find out it was the one you used on her.
I'll never get it.
He twisted, came up. Went down. I was right about the gun. Charles Dean? He was completely innocent. Why had Felix phoned his apartment? Well, I'd mentioned Dean's name, and so he figured I was there. He'd seen Dean when he used to call on Mrs. Clark. A look at the phone book did the rest. Why did Felix kill Mrs. Clark? Before he died, he came out with it. She'd lived in the apartment building for years, and he'd loved her all the time. Finally, when he got around to telling her, she treated it like a big joke. She laughed and laughed and laughed, till he stopped it by clogging her windpipe. James Clark, he was set free. Did I say free? He married Doreen Walker as soon as he got out. But don't get the idea that I don't believe in marriage. It's a wonderful thing, if you want to make one girl happy. Me, I never did like specializing. Good night.